Hi there, I'm Suranga from Englishman. Today I'm going to talk about vocabulary and how to boost your vocabulary, how to increase the number of words that you know, the phrases that you know, that is increasing vocabulary. So, yeah, when it comes to vocabulary, අද මම කතා කරන්නේ මේ වචන එහෙම නැත්නම් vocabulary එක කොහොමද English අපි ඉගෙන ගන්නකොට ලර්න් කරන්නේ කොහොමද කියලා තමයි කතා කරන්නේ. ඉතින් මේක මම ඉංග්‍රීසි භාෂාවෙන් තමයි ගෙන එන්නේ. ඒකත් ඉතින් ඔබට හොඳයි ඉංග්‍රීසි භාෂාවට සවන් දෙන එක total immersion එකක් විදිහට තමයි මේ වීඩියෝ එක කරන්නේ. ඉතින් අපි එනම් බලමු vocabulary පිළිබඳව. Right, vocabulary. When people say that vocabulary, you think about words. What sort of words are they? That is words, phrases, idioms, or sort of collocations and different things, they come to vocabulary. So, but however, even though you say a phrase and it is composed of words, words make phrases and things like that. Finally, everything comes to words. So, it is the key. If you want to speak or if you want to write, if you want to do something, thinking about the language in a language that you like, vocabulary is the thing. Vocabulary is the key. No words mean you can do nothing. So therefore, vocabulary is really important. My second point that I'm going to talk about is what do we mean by active and passive vocabulary. Basically, people talk about two different ways of vocabulary. That is active vocabulary and passive vocabulary. What do you mean by active vocabulary? What do you mean by passive vocabulary? So, you can see I'm talking about vocabulary. The words, phrases or whatever I'm using belongs to active vocabulary. Why should I say so? It is active. I'm using, I'm doing something actively. So, that is active vocabulary. So, words, phrases I'm using are in active vocabulary. You can think about that in this way. You just think that you have two containers, two vessels or two boxes. And one box is active vocabulary, the other one is passive vocabulary. So, active vocabulary is words, phrases or whatever I am using now. And passive vocabulary is there are words, a good number of words that I don't use. But when I read a newspaper, or when I listen to somebody, or a native speaker or anybody, and when I read newspapers, when I am reading a book or a novel, I find words and phrases. I know all these things, most of them I know how to use them, but yet for all, even though I am not using them, that is my passive vocabulary. So we have two types of vocabularies. One is passive vocabulary, the other one is active vocabulary. Passive vocabulary, we know the words, we know how to use them basically. Generally, we have the idea, but we are not using them. But what we are using is our active vocabulary. So, which one is important? That is the next question, you know, that we have active vocabulary and passive vocabulary. Which one is important? So, I mean, you happen to think that active vocabulary is important. Yeah, that is the truth basically, because I'm using the active vocabulary. So you think active vocabulary is the most important. But why not passive vocabulary? Do you think passive vocabulary is not so important? No, passive vocabulary is also very important, just like active vocabulary. Why is that? Just think about caterpillar and butterfly. Caterpillar, you know the caterpillar, eating leaves and things like that. Caterpillars become butterflies, you know that. So caterpillars become butterflies. We like butterflies. And passive vocabulary becomes active vocabulary. Before active vocabulary, words in your active vocabulary once are passive words of passive vocabulary. So words in passive vocabulary becomes words in active vocabulary. Therefore, it is really important to understand there would be no active words in active vocabulary before there being in passive vocabulary. To come to active vocabulary, you have to pass the test, you have to go to passive vocabulary. So therefore, words in passive vocabulary are really important, because active passive vocabulary the words go to active vocabulary. So therefore, passive vocabulary is really important as they come from passive to active. That is the way it happens. And another thing is actually that is the first way we find that passive vocabulary is important, because once passive then becomes active. If you want a word in active vocabulary, it should go through passive vocabulary. So therefore, passive vocabulary is really important. And the second part is for comprehension, to understand stories, to understand what people talk about, to understand news bulletin, to understand everything that you hear, words and phrases people use. It is your passive vocabulary. Maybe a native speaker comes to you and talk to you about things. You understand perfectly, but you don't use the words. You understand all the words that is talking about, what he is talking about. So you can give an answer, very short answer, using your active vocabulary. Yeah, I think so. It is this. So you have to pass that white building, and next it is Ceylon Bank, you would say. That is, you are using your active vocabulary. But old Suddha's words are not your active vocabulary. Suddha would use different types of words. Most of them would be your passive vocabulary, in your passive vocabulary. So passive vocabulary is really important to understand the guys, the videos, the newspapers, the novels and everything. So therefore, passive vocabulary is really, really important in a way. So yeah, that is it. So therefore, don't think that passive vocabulary is unimportant. It is really important. My next point is, some people learn words using lists. They learn things by heart. People would say, these are very important words. And people would say, they would give you a good number of words. So you think that it is the important words. So you learn them by heart. You just write them down, or you just put them in one of your books, so notebook, and then you learn them. So learning by heart, in a way you learn all these things. Yeah, you think that you're learning words. So it is not so. The thing is actually, anything that we learn, we tend to forget all these things. So that is, forgetting is one part of learning. Always when we learn things, we tend to forget. For examinations we learn, but we happen to forget all these things. Forgetting is one part of learning. You cannot remember all these things that you learn. So therefore, you have to be ready to forget things. So therefore, how can you understand, how can you learn things, and how can you retain, how can you have all these things in your mind, and how to prevent them from going away from you. So that is what is really important. So learning lists and things, you would tend to forget, you forget all these things. So it would not remain for a long period of time. If you are doing a test, that would be quite okay. For a test, it is really, really good, because for a short period of time, you will remember all these things, the words and everything. And then after the test, after some time, you will forget all these things. You know that happens. So I think you must have gone through this particular experience. So whatever you learn, you tend to forget. For a test, we learn things, and then finally we happen to forget all these things. So that is so. So therefore, how can you learn words, phrases, or things like that, so that you can remember all these things? That is not learning lists. By learning lists or thinking that they are important, when you learn, you tend to forget. So then you would ask a question: how can you do things so that you can remember all these things? That is this. As hyperpolyglots say, hyperpolyglots are people who have learned a good number of languages and doing things fluently. And they say that to understand, to remember things, first you have to notice things. So when you notice things, you learn things. For example, if you notice a word or phrase or something like that, you learn that. Then you will never forget it, most probably. So what is noticing in language learning? In language learning, noticing is basically you happen to observe them, you happen to notice them when they are used in real situations, in sort of an authentic situations. So, for example, storytelling, when somebody tells a story, and you'd find words and phrases appear in that. And then if you know the words and phrases that in that story, you happen to notice them. Aha, it is that word. That is the word that guy used it. I learned that word at school. Also, somehow you notice it. Maybe you learn that word, you cannot remember the word, but when you notice, when you happen to expose yourself to that sort of authentic materials, you would notice that. And then if this is repeated for a long period of time, many times, this way and that way, then you happen to remember that. That is really important, to remember things. You have to notice them. So how can you notice? You notice only when you see sort of authentic materials, that is maybe novels, maybe short stories, maybe newspapers, or in a way that they use the language in a real means, real way, that is it. So therefore, I want you to go to sort of materials. And another point, learning vocabulary so that you can remember all these things, they suggest you to, they means the hyperpolyglots, and most of the theories of language learning, you have to go to total immersion. Total immersion basically is, as you know, you have learned that total immersion is, you should be totally immersed in the language, that is totally immersed in the language that you are focusing at. So for example, if you are learning English language, you have to use materials so that you are really going into the language, just like you are going into water. When you dive, you go into water and you are surrounded by water, something like that. So therefore, total immersion. So when learning language, we basically try to learn all these things using the mother tongue. Always a mother tongue appears. So that is not a good thing. I'm going to talk about this in a separate video. And when you think that you're learning language, and mostly if you hear your mother tongue, you're not learning that much. That is good for knowledge. You will remember all these things, but you won't be able to use it because your pathways, neural connections are not coupling with the target language. For your, if you want your neurons, if you want your neural pathways, if you want to, the patterns are the nerve cells in the brain to obey, to support you, to help you in speaking the particular language, you have to be totally immersed. When you are totally immersed, that is completely you are in that language, the brain recognizes the patterns of that language. And then you happen to be quite comfortable after some time. And then automatically, naturally, unknowingly, you would start speaking, or you would start using the language in a nice way. So therefore, it is total immersion. Another very important point of active vocabulary and passive vocabulary is, always passive vocabulary is very large, you know that. Active vocabulary is small. So therefore, it comes just like a pyramid. The upper part of the pyramid is really narrow. Base is basically of really wide, you know. When you think about a pyramid, base is really wide. The upper part, the summit is the pointed part is really small. So, but just think, if the pyramid is like that, upper part is really small. If the base of the pyramid is bigger, upper part is also bigger. If the base is really great, upper part becomes great. So therefore, when you widen, when you increase your passive vocabulary, that is the base of the vocabulary pyramid, active vocabulary automatically, naturally increases, so improves. So therefore, if you trying to expose yourself to basically the authentic materials of the language. That is, authentic material of language is basically the materials they are using not to teach you the language, for some other purposes, maybe discussions, maybe spoken things. Some learning materials are also sort of, it goes in an authentic way. For example, storytelling. Storytelling is basically authentic because it's a story. You have to deliver the story, and you will learn that. So, in teaching, basically, mostly what is used is materials not that much authentic, but even in that field you find authentic materials. But better if you find the real materials not meant for teaching you the language. So therefore, that is area that you have to face in day-to-day in the day-to-day situations, that you are not learning language in the society. You are facing the real situation. So therefore, if you want, you learn what you observe. That is what they say. Albert Bandura, that is, Albert Bandura is a psychologist in the field of education in India, and there is a theory, observational learning. Learning is always observational, he says. You learn the things you observe. So therefore, it is really important. If you observe, what we observe is schools and classes or whatever in teaching, what we observe mostly is singular, you understand. Maybe very beautiful phrases they would say, maybe very beautiful sort of words and idioms and everything they would say, but mostly if you hear the singular language, sad to say, singular is registered in your brain. So we need not singular to be registered, because we know what singular is, we know the shape of singular. So if you are going to learn English language, so that should be totally English. So if you like this video, and subscribe us, comment, and then watch some other videos of what I have done. And you don't want to go to my videos, but there are millions of videos in YouTube to find sort of authentic materials. Then do that. Bye.